The late afternoon heat pressed down over the abandoned Riverbend Lodge, turning the air heavy and still, as if the land itself refused to breathe. Mike Lawson lowered himself to his knees, feeling the old wood creak beneath his weight. The once luxury deck was now splintered and gray, reclaimed slowly by the Okavango Delta. Emma Reed hovered a few feet behind him, one hand clutching her camera, the other wiping sweat from her brow. Cabello, the local tracker, stood farther back, silent, his eyes fixed on the narrow crack beneath a broken concrete slab. There was movement under there, small, quick, and desperate. At first it had sounded like wind scraping along metal, but the moment Mike lay flat and pressed his ear to the ground, he knew better. It was the sound that always came right before fear or death. He eased forward, sliding one arm into the shadowed gap. "Easy, I'm not here to hurt you," he whispered. His voice was low, steady, the same tone he used years ago when handling wounded animals, or when talking calmly to clients who were panicking over a bad mortgage back home. Funny how life circled back on itself, he thought. One day you're advising a tourist about travel insurance for the safari. The next you're lying on your belly trying to convince something wild that you mean no harm. The darkness swallowed his hand. For a breath, nothing happened. Then, everything exploded. Two tiny bodies slammed into him from inside the void, claws tearing through the leather of his glove as if it were paper. A growl, no, a miniature roar, burst out, sharp enough to rattle his bones. Emma gasped and stepped back, raising the camera instinctively. Cabello murmured a warning in Setswana, reaching toward Mike, but Mike held up his free hand. "Don't pull me out. Not yet." The claws raked again. Then teeth, sharp, needle-fine, full of rage bigger than their bodies. The cubs weren't afraid of him, they hated him, with an intensity he felt down to his chest. He didn't know why, not yet, but the hostility in those small blows felt personal, almost human. Mike stayed still, letting their fury wash over him. Pain shot through his wrist, but he didn't flinch. He'd spent half his life dealing harm. The least he could do now, he thought, was endure a little of it. The boards beneath him smelled of rot and dust. His cheek pressed against a patch of wood warm from the sun, though a faint shiver ran through him as the memory of this place whispered back. Nights when he'd stood right here with clients, eager for a trophy, eager for a kill, eager for him to lead the way. Emma edged closer, voice hushed. "Mike, what do you want me to do?" "Just keep recording," he murmured. "People need to see what fear looks like when it's earned." He didn't say, "my fear, my guilt," but he felt it. The cubs struck again, weaker this time, panting from the effort. They were babies, thin, starving, but still trying to fight off the only person who could save them. Mike swallowed the burn rising in his throat. How many times had creatures just like them tried to run from him in the past? How many didn't get the chance? He spoke again, softer now. Hey, it's all right. No one's going to hurt you anymore." His voice wavered just slightly, enough for Emma to glance at him, really look at him. She'd heard the rumors, watched the documentaries exposing him in the past, but she'd also watched him bury his pride, trading television lights for dusty conservation boots. Maybe that was why she'd come all the way from the States to intern at Whispering Hearts Wildlife, because she'd sensed the story wasn't over yet. Cabello pointed to the left. "They're moving, you see?" Mike nodded. He felt them shifting, not attacking now, just trembling. He breathed slowly. Good, that's it." For a moment, everything settled, the wind, the dust, even the branches overhead. Then a tiny nose brushed his torn glove, not biting, just touching, testing. Mike's eyes softened. "There you go," he whispered. "I'm right here." The cub didn't retreat. Its breath trembled against his palm. A wave of emotion hit him, sharp, unexpected, almost embarrassing. Something inside him cracked, the way dry earth splits after the first rain. He wasn't sure whether it was hope or heartbreak, only that it hurt in a way that felt deserved. Emma lowered her voice. "If people watching this feel what I'm feeling right now, they're going to stay with this story to the end," she said softly. "I hope they stick around and subscribe to Whispering Hearts. They need to witness what happens next." Mike didn't answer. He couldn't, because at that very moment, the second cub crawled closer and let out a sound so small, so fragile, it cut straight through him. They still didn't trust him, but they wanted to live, and somehow they'd chosen him to reach for. "Good," he whispered again, more to himself than them. "I'm not going anywhere." Just as the tension eased, a distant engine rumbled across the dry plain. Not a tourist jeep. Too quiet. Too deliberate. Cabello stiffened. Emma stopped breathing. Mike didn't move his arm from the darkness. But he knew whatever had hurt these cubs was still out there and getting closer.
The rumble of the distant engine faded, swallowed by the tall grass and the thick heat. Mike stayed still a moment longer, letting the cubs settle into a tense, fragile quiet beneath the concrete. When he finally eased himself up onto his elbows, Emma could see the strain in his shoulders, the kind that came not from age, but from memory. She reached out as if to steady him, then thought better of it. Mike Lawson wasn't the kind of man you touched when he was remembering who he used to be. He brushed the dust from his shirt, though the stains of time and guilt had been there long before today. "Let's give them a minute," he said softly, nodding toward the gap under the slab. "They'll need time to understand I'm not the danger." Emma hesitated. "But you were calm back there, even when they tore into you." Mike forced a half smile. "I've had worse things sink their teeth into me." He didn't elaborate, but he didn't have to. Emma had done her research before flying out to join the Whispering Hearts program. Anyone her age had seen the viral exposés, the documentary specials, the late-night segments tearing him apart. The world had made a sport out of condemning him when the footage surfaced. Mike Lawson, the once beloved safari guide, standing beside wealthy clients as they posed with their kills. Some clips showed carcasses of antelope or buffalo. Others showed lions. And then there was the incident at Riverbend. Grainy, leaked footage Emma had only ever watched once. A lioness stumbling after a gunshot. A man's voice, calm but urgent. The camera shaking as someone whispered, "Mike." That was her shoulder. She won't get far. He had quit 3 days later, vanished from television, sold everything he owned in Montana, and somehow resurfaced at the bottom rung of a conservation team in Africa, rebuilding fences and hauling water barrels, while people online dissected his sins with the kind of moral clarity only distance can offer. Now he stood again at Riverbend Lodge, the last place he had wanted to return to, staring into the very darkness that held his past. Cabello approached him with quiet steps. "You know this place too well," the tracker murmured. "Your face changed when we arrived." Mike didn't deny it. He simply looked out across the warped deck boards toward what used to be the main lodge entrance. Weeds pushed up through the tiles. The roof sagged in the center like a wounded animal. This place had once been filled with laughter, champagne bottles popping and clients bragging about life insurance policies, new businesses, stock market wins, talking money while death crept silently at their feet. He exhaled slowly. "I worked out of this lodge for 6 years. The owner paid good money for a man who could find big cats on command. Back then, this was all part of the job." "And now?" Emma asked gently. "Now it's the part I regret most." The wind shifted. Something creaked inside the empty dining hall. The air carried the faint scent of old ash, remnants of a fire that had burned through the lodge after the scandal. Mike remembered it clearly. The protests, the reporters flying in from New York and London, drones buzzing overhead, clients fleeing, sponsors calling to cut ties, attempts to justify, explain, deny, until even he couldn't listen to himself anymore. What hollowed him out most wasn't the public outrage, it was the memory of one particular lioness, the one that never returned after he fired the shot meant to impress a billionaire who complained the sunset lighting was too soft for a dramatic kill shot. Mike had given directions, lined up the angle, and watched her collapse into the grass, eyes burning not with fear, but with something closer to understanding. He had never forgotten that look. And now, two tiny cubs hid only feet away from the place where the worst parts of him were born. Emma raised her camera again, but this time she didn't film the cubs, she filmed Mike. Perhaps she sensed that the story wasn't just about two terrified babies clinging to life. It was also about a man trying to outlive the shadow of who he once was. Whispering Hearts wasn't just a channel about wildlife, it was about redemption, quiet or otherwise. "You think people will believe you've changed?" she asked, not accusing, curious. "I don't need them to believe it. I just need to keep choosing it." A soft scrape came from beneath the slab. The cubs had shifted again, this time not attacking, but moving closer together, seeking comfort in the only safety they knew, each other. Mike lowered his voice. "Those two, they didn't choose any of this. Whatever happens next happens because we're here, because someone else hurt them before we ever arrived. And because you offered your hand," she murmured. He gave a quiet nod. Somewhere behind them, the engine from earlier revved again. Farther away, but not gone. Danger still lurked. The past always did. But for now, the only thing that mattered was the small, trembling breath coming from beneath the concrete. The beginning of a story he wasn't sure he deserved to be a part of, yet couldn't walk away from.
By late afternoon, the sun had shifted just enough to throw a harsh angle of light under the cracked slab. Dust sparkled there, floating through the beam from Mike's flashlight, but he couldn't see much beyond two small shapes pressed against the farthest corner. They were no longer slamming into his hand, yet every line of their tiny bodies screamed tension. He lay flat again, shoulder wedged painfully against the warped deck plank, arm stretched into the dark. The torn leather of his gloves stuck slightly, where blood had dried along the seam. He flexed his fingers once, testing them. They still worked. That was enough. "Same plan?" Emma asked, hovering near his boots. "Same plan," he said, slow, no surprises. He began to talk, not about anything important, just sound. He told them where he'd driven from that morning, how the road had washed out in one place and the truck had nearly bottomed out. He described the way the sunrise had turned the floodplain pink, how a heron had lifted off from the water like an old man's careful step. It sounded ridiculous, narrating his day to a pair of terrified lion cubs, but it was better than silence. Silence made room for fear. A soft rasp came from the darkness, one of them shifting, claws scraping concrete. Emma fidgeted. "Mike, we could radio Nandi, ask her about a sedative, just a small dose. I mean, there has to be some kind of emergency protocol." "There is," Cabello said quietly from the steps. "And it usually ends with something dying." Emma shot him a look. "I'm just saying we can't stay here forever. They're scared. You're bleeding. This place makes my skin crawl. There's probably snakes under there." "There probably are," Mike agreed, "which is why we don't go reaching in like we're grabbing a lost credit card under the couch." That earned a little huff of air from Cabello that might have been a laugh. Emma sighed, lowering herself to sit cross-legged nearby. "So we just wait? We show them we're not like the last humans they met. That's the whole job." With his free hand, he slowly slid a metal bowl along the deck, guiding it toward the gap. The sound of metal on wood was faint but sharp. He lowered it to the ground, then used his fingertips to nudge it inside, inch by inch. The bowl scraped on the concrete, the water inside sloshing softly. The cubs exploded again. A hiss, a snarl, claws raking at the new object. One of them batted the bowl so hard it clanged against the underside of the slab. Water splashed outward, soaking the dirt. Emma flinched. "They hate you," she blurted, then winced at her own words. "I mean, they hate what people have done." Mike nodded, eyes still on the gap. "That's fair. People have given them plenty of reasons." He softened. "But they're thirsty. Give it time." Minutes stretched. The heat pressed down harder. Sweat ran from his temples into his hair. A fly landed near his eye, and he forced himself not to jerk. Somewhere far off, he thought he heard that engine again, then lost it under the drone of insects. Gradually, the sounds inside changed. Less snarling, more panting. A small, uncertain chirp, the kind lion cubs make when they aren't sure what to do next. Then the faintest lap of tongue on metal. "There you go. Good girl. Or boy. We'll figure that out later." Emma leaned forward, straining to see. "Are they drinking?" "Looks like it," he said. Relief loosened something in his shoulders. Water first. Everything else comes after. He waited until the sounds faded, until the only thing he heard was their breathing. Then he slid his hand a little farther in, fingers open, palm up. This time, he didn't move at all. Not even his thumb. 5 minutes passed. 10. His shoulder burned. His lower back had gone from achy to numb. Cabello eventually stepped away, circling the lodge to check for tracks, for signs that whoever had poisoned the lioness might come back to reclaim more than trophy money. At last, the smallest of touches. A single whisker brushing his skin where the glove had been torn. Then a nose, damp and cool, pressed cautiously against the edge of his palm. The cub froze there, completely still. Mike felt its tiny breath against his fingers, fast and shallow. If he closed his hand too quick, he could grab it, drag it out, force this rescue the way he used to force a shot, a deal, an outcome. He didn't move. "It's okay," he whispered. "You get to choose this time." Behind that nose, beyond the dark, there was a life that had already seen too much of the worst kind of human. Somewhere out there, men with guns and poison still circled, treating wild lives like disposable assets on a balance sheet. Mike knew that world too well. He lived in it, earned good money in it, the way some folks back home made fortunes pushing home loans and auto insurance. It felt normal then, necessary, even smart. Now, with that tiny heartbeat pulsing against his hand, it just felt obscene. The cub's nose moved slowly along his palm, memorizing his scent. It didn't purr, it didn't relax, but it also didn't bite. Then from deeper in the hole, the second cub growled, a low, warning rumble. The first jerked back, claws scraping his glove again, and the moment was over. Mike exhaled. A long sound, somewhere between a sigh and a promise. "All right, round one goes to you." He eased his arm out, flexing his cramped fingers. Emma swallowed, eyes bright with something she didn't seem ready to name. "That was something," she said. "I don't know what, but something." "It was a start," he answered. From the far end of the dried-up access road, the engine roared to life again. Closer now, the sound rolling over the dead lodge like distant thunder. Whatever had broken this family once was still moving out there. And this time, Mike thought, pushing himself back to his feet, it was going to find a very different man waiting.
The sun had dipped lower, stretching long shadows across the broken tiles of Riverbend Lodge. Mike rose slowly from the ground, shaking out the ache in his arm. The cubs had retreated deep into the darkness again, but something was different now. Less rage, more trembling. They were running out of strength. And time. Cabello returned from circling the perimeter, his boots crunching softly over debris. Tracks, he murmured. Men. 2, maybe 3. Not old. A few hours at most. Emma stiffened. The engine we heard. Most likely. Mike didn't flinch, but the tension in his jaw hardened. They weren't here for sightseeing. He knelt near the crack again, inhaling gently. The air carried more than dust. Something acrid hung beneath it. Chemical. Bitter. He leaned closer. "Do you smell that?" Emma crouched beside him. "Smell what? I don't..." Cabello cut in. "Poison." Mike nodded grimly. Carbofuran. Or something close. He didn't need a lab to confirm it. The sickly metallic scent clung to the dirt, to the cub's fur, even to the tips of their claws where they'd struck him. He'd smelt it before, years ago, on carcasses left by poachers who wanted everything that came near to die. "We need to look around," he said, pushing to his feet. "If their mother is nearby, we'll find her." Emma's breath caught. "Their mother? You think she..." "I think we need to see the truth, not guess it." They followed the scent trail past the ruined lodge wall, stepping over broken glass and twisted metal. The air grew stiller, heavier. A few vultures stirred in a dead tree overhead, silent as ghosts. Mike's stomach tightened. Predators didn't gather like that by accident. When they rounded the corner, the world seemed to fall silent. There she lay, what remained of her, sprawled near the dry creek bed. A lioness, but only an outline now. Her ribs jutted through sunken skin. Her muzzle was stiff, eyes empty, already claimed by insects. Flies lifted off her in a dark cloud as they approached. Emma pressed her mouth. "Oh God." Cabello bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect in a place where such things still mattered. But Mike stood frozen, not with fear, with recognition. He stepped closer, squatting beside the lioness. Her paws had been cut, her canines removed. Trophy parts. Typical. Brutal. Efficient. His hands curled into fists. Then he saw it. On one ear, what was left of it, there was a jagged tear. Not from fighting, not from an animal. A clean edge, sliced by something sharp. Someone had tried to remove a tracking tag. Rushed. Careless. Angry. "What kind of person?" Emma whispered. Mike didn't answer. He reached out and touched the dried fur near her shoulder. The poison smell was strongest here. Whoever had killed her had done more than pull the trigger. They'd soaked her body with toxins so anything that fed from her would die too. Cubs, hyenas, vultures, anything. As he knelt there, something stirred at the lioness's side. Small footprints, barely visible now but unmistakable. 2 sets, tiny, moving in circles before heading toward the lodge. "They stayed with her," Mike said quietly. "They didn't understand why she wouldn't wake up." Emma wiped at her eyes. "They tried to nurse from her, didn't they?" He nodded once. Behind them, Cabello called out, "Tracks here. The men came back after killing her. They looked for her cubs." Mike rose. His voice was low, but sharp as broken stone. "They'll come again. Cubs that young are worth money on the black market, more than the mother. Emma's eyes widened. So we're not the only ones looking for them. No, he said, we're just the only ones who intend to keep them alive. As they walked back toward the lodge, the weight of what they'd found settled over them like the heat itself. Every step felt heavier, every breath carried the bitter tang of the toxin. Mike stopped before reaching the deck, turning to face the fading horizon. He'd spent decades taking life from this land. Now the land was offering him a ledger he didn't ask to balance, but one he'd been running from for years. He stared back at the broken lodge, at the gap where the cubs trembled in fear, and the truth struck him with a force he wasn't prepared for. Someone had begun a cycle of violence here. But it wasn't the men hunting lions. It was him. Long before these cubs were born, before their mother had her last breath beside the creek, before trophies were carved and sold, Mike had fired the first shot that set everything into motion. He closed his eyes, breath shaking. Those cubs, he murmured, almost to himself, are running from a wound that started with me. Emma looked at him sharply, sensing something deeper beneath his words, but Mike stepped back toward the lodge before she could ask. There was work to do, cubs to save, danger closing in, and the ghosts of his past were no longer content to stay buried.
By the time they returned to the shattered deck of Riverbend Lodge, dusk was starting to pool in the low places. The light had softened, turning the ruins gold, but nothing about the scene felt peaceful. The cubs were hidden deeper now. Mike could sense it even before he knelt again. Their breathing had changed, thinning out into quick, shallow bursts. Desperation does that. So does poison. He lowered himself to the ground with a stiffness that came from more than age. Emma sat near his feet, hugging her knees, while Cabello stood watch facing the horizon, rifle slung but not raised. The engine they'd heard earlier had gone silent, but silence could be worse. Silence meant someone had stopped. Waiting. Mike pressed his cheek to the warped wood once more and slid his arm into the dark. "I know you're scared," he whispered. "I know everything hurts, but we're not leaving without you." The cubs didn't lash out this time. No claws, no hissing, just that trembling again, a vibration so faint he felt it in his bones more than on his skin. He angled the flashlight carefully, sending a soft beam toward the far corner. Two small shapes huddled together, ribs too visible, eyes hollowed by hunger and shock. One blinked at the sudden light, the smaller cub, and its eyelids fluttered like it didn't have the strength to fully open them. The other pressed protectively over its sibling, teeth barely showing, a warning, but a weak one. Emma whispered, "They look worse." "They are," Mike said, "the toxins burning through their systems. If they were bigger, older, maybe they'd have more time, but like this?" His voice faded. Emma's breath hitched. "We have to get them out now. We can't just sit here watching them fade." "We can't force them either," Mike replied. "If we grab at them, we teach them humans mean pain. That makes everything that comes next harder." "But if we don't," she shot back, "they die." He didn't argue. He simply reached farther into the gap, letting his hand hover in the space between them and the world. Slowly, he began talking again, steady, low, unthreatening. "You're not alone. You're not going to be alone again, not if I can help it." Cabello shifted behind them. "We don't have long," he murmured. "Tracks near the creek. Those men were looking for something. Cubs, skins, doesn't matter. They'll come back." Mike kept his eyes on the trembling silhouettes. "Then we stay ahead of them." One cub, the larger one, lifted its head. It sniffed in Mike's direction, nose twitching. The flashlight beam caught the dampness along its muzzle. It let out a tiny sound, halfway between a whine and a growl. "That's fear," Mike murmured, "but not hatred anymore." He reached farther. His torn glove brushed the floor. "Come on, kid. You fought so hard back there. Fight now." The cub stared. Its body shook once. Then it edged forward an inch, barely measurable, but enough to steal the breath from Emma's lungs. "That's it," Mike whispered. "That's it. I'm right here." The cub inched forward again. A twig snapped somewhere in the tall grass behind them. Cabello whirled. "Movement!" Mike froze. Another crack, then rustling. Emma's eyes widened. "They're here!" Mike didn't turn, couldn't. He knew that if he pulled back now, if he jerked away in fear, the bond forming under the concrete would shatter. The cubs would bolt deeper, hide where even his arm couldn't reach, and they'd lose precious minutes they didn't have. "Cabello," Mike said softly, "you handle whatever's out there. Emma stays with me. Nobody fires unless we have no choice." Cabello moved silently to the left, vanishing behind the collapsed wall. Emma leaned closer, voice trembling. "Mike, what if they're armed?" "They're armed, but so are we." She glanced at the pistol strapped to his belt. He didn't look like a man who wanted to use it. He looked like a man trying not to become who he used to be. A low groan came from beneath the concrete, the smaller cub. Mike's attention snapped back. "Easy," he breathed. "Stay with me." He set the water bowl down again, this time closer to his hand. The larger cub sniffed at it, then nudged the smaller one forward with its head, protective, even now. The bond between them was fierce, strong as blood, strong as fear. The smaller cub crawled forward on shaky limbs. Mike barely dared to breathe. "Yes, right here. You're doing fine." The cub's paw brushed his palm, soft, too soft, lighter than it should have been for a lion that age. He turned his hand slowly, offering the back of it instead of the palm, less threatening. The cub pressed its face against his skin. Emma covered her mouth with her hand to keep from making a sound. The second cub moved too, crawling toward him with a stubbornness that felt familiar, something wild refusing to give up. Mike let the moment steady him. Good kids, brave kids. He shifted his fingers, barely a tremble of movement, and the cub didn't pull away. Instead, it leaned into him, as though exhausted from fighting the world. He slid his arm farther, slowly dragging the water bowl toward them. They drank. Not much, not fast, but enough. A breath left his chest, long and tight. "We're going to make it. You hear me? We're going to make it." Cabello reappeared at the edge of the lodge. "Tracks leading away," he whispered. "Men moved south, but they'll circle back." "How long?" Mike asked. "Hard to say. An hour, maybe less." Mike nodded. Emma touched his shoulder. "We need to take them now." He looked at the cubs, leaning against each other, too weak to flee. "Not take them," he said softly. "Let them choose to come." The cubs stared at him, two tiny souls pressed between fear and trust. One step forward would change everything. But outside, danger crawled closer with every passing minute, and for the first time, the cubs weren't the only ones trembling.
The light was almost gone when Mike finally eased his arm back from under the slab and pushed himself to his feet. His back protested, his shoulder burned, but the cubs had drunk. They'd pressed their faces against his torn glove and, for a moment, stopped trying to fight the world. It wasn't enough. Not with poison chewing through their insides. "We have to move," he said quietly. now. Emma scrambled up. How? They can barely stand. You saw them. We don't ask them to walk, he replied. We carry them. Cabello disappeared around the truck and came back with a small transport crate they kept for emergencies, usually for injured antelope or the occasional snared wild dog, not for lion cubs fighting off death. He set it on the deck, its metal sides clanking dully in the heavy air. Mike knelt again, this time with purpose. "All right, kids," he murmured, sliding his arm back into the dark. "I need you to be brave one more time." The larger cub was closest now. It didn't snarl, just watched him with those dull, wary eyes. He moved slow, giving it every chance to bite him again if it chose. When his hand reached its chest, he felt the rapid, thin flutter of its heart. "Easy," he whispered. "I'm going to help you, whether you think I deserve to or not." With one smooth motion, he curled his fingers under its belly and lifted. The cub was shockingly light. It wiggled once, a weak protest, then sagged in his grip. As he drew it into the open, Emma let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. The cub blinked at the fading sky, legs dangling, paws too big for its thin frame. That was when he saw it. On the left side of its face, just behind the eye, 3 dark spots clustered together in a loose triangle. Not quite a pattern a person would notice at first glance, but once you saw it, you could never unsee it. Mike's fingers tightened. The world seemed to tilt. Emma saw his expression change. "What is it?" He didn't answer. His gaze was locked on those spots, and in his mind, the years rolled backward. The smell of gun oil, the weight of a rifle, the way a golden shape had moved through tall grass at sunset. Nyala, the lioness every client wanted, the lioness he'd trailed for weeks. The lioness he finally lined up in his scope one evening, while a man behind him whispered about angles and lighting instead of life and death. She'd had that same stray cluster of spots, right there. He remembered staring at them through the scope, using them as a landmark as he adjusted the shot. He had fired. She had gone down. And then, impossibly, she'd gotten up again and vanished into the brush. He had never seen her again. Until now. Not her. Her mark. On this cub's face. "Mike?" Emma's voice was gentler now. "You're scaring me." He swallowed hard. "These aren't just any cubs," he said hoarsely. I think they're Nyala's." Emma frowned. "The lioness from the video? The one from the old footage?" He nodded once. The knowledge settled on him like a physical weight. Somewhere between that shot years ago and this poisoned carcass by the creek, other men had stepped in, men who hadn't hesitated, who hadn't walked away. They'd finished what he started, and now her children were dying in his hands. His voice shook. "We're out of time." He carried the cub to the crate, laying it gently on the folded blanket inside. It whimpered once, then curled as if trying to disappear. The second cub was harder to reach, wedged deeper into the corner, but too weak to resist when he finally got his arms around it. When both were inside, Emma closed the latch with trembling fingers. "How long do they have?" she asked. "Hours, maybe less." He pulled his satellite phone from his vest and walked a few steps away, searching for a better signal. The screen flickered, then steadied. He scrolled to a number he knew by heart. "Nandi, it's Mike. I've got 2 lion cubs around 8 weeks. Mother's dead, poison carcass, cubs show secondary exposure, weakness, shallow breath, pale gums. I need help." On the other end, Dr. Nandi Mabeki's voice was all business. "How far are you from the station?" 45 minutes if I push it." "You don't have 45 minutes, not with secondary poisoning at that size." "I know, but they're still fighting. I can feel it. Tell me what to do on the way, and meet us there if you can get a plane in the air." There was a pause, then a sigh. "All right, I'll get the strip to clear a landing, but, Mike, if the levels are as bad as you say, we may have to make a humane call. Not yet. Not with these two." He ended the call, turned back, and met Emma's eyes. "Get in. We're going." The sky was bleeding into purple as he started the engine. Dust rose behind them in a long, desperate trail. In the back, the crate rattled with every bump. Little bodies thumped against the sides and then went still again. Emma twisted around in her seat, watching them. "They're so quiet." "That's not a good sign," Mike said, "but quiet we can work with. It's when they stop altogether that we've lost." He drove faster than he should have over that rough track, the old truck bucking and groaning. Every mile felt stolen. Every jolt felt like a threat. For the first time in years, Mike felt that old, ugly familiarity of making life-and-death decisions with incomplete information, nowhere near what you'd call a hospital, and no way to call for backup beyond a fragile radio and a tired vet with too much on her plate. Once, he had made those calls on behalf of men who wanted something to hang on their walls. Now he was making it for two lives that never should have needed saving in the first place. The ranger station's faded roof finally appeared on the horizon, a smudge of tin against the sky. Mike pressed harder on the accelerator. Behind him, in the crate, one of the cubs let out a thin, broken sound. "Hold on," he whispered, though they couldn't hear him through the roar of the engine. "Your mother didn't survive what I did to her, but I'll be damned if I let the world finish the rest of her story with you."
The truck skidded into the dusty yard of the ranger station just as the last streaks of daylight collapsed behind the acacia line. The tiny building, more shed than clinic, glowed weakly from a single bulb hanging over the doorway. Dr. Nandi Mimbeki was already waiting outside, sleeves rolled up, her field kit open on the ground beside her like a soldier's medical bag in an old war film. "Bring them," she said the moment Mike jumped out. No greeting, no small talk, just urgency. Emma scrambled to the back seat, fingers shaking as she unlatched the crate. "They haven't moved in 10 minutes, she whispered. Mike lifted the smaller cub first. It felt even lighter than before, like carrying a bundle of fur with nothing inside. The larger one sagged in his arms when he reached for it, head lolling against his wrist. For a horrifying second, he thought it was already gone. "Inside," Nandi ordered. "Now." They rushed into the administrative room, bare walls, metal filing cabinets, a cluttered desk that Cabello shoved aside with his shoulder. Nandi pulled a portable analyzer from her bag, snapping its lid open with practiced speed. "Put them on the blankets and step back. I need space." Mike set the cubs down gently. Their breathing was shallow, fast, wrong in every way. A faint chemical smell still lingered around their fur. Nandi worked quickly, sliding tubes, checking their gums, placing a tiny stethoscope against ribs that rose too little and too fast. Her expression darkened. "Secondary poisoning," she said softly. "Both of them. Severe." Emma swallowed hard. "What do we do?" "Everything," Nandi said simply. She inserted IV lines, absurdly thin ones, into paws no bigger than a grown man's thumb joint. Clear fluid began to drip. She administered activated charcoal, antibiotics, a cocktail of supportive medications designed for emergencies when full equipment was days away. The cubs flinched at the needles, but barely. They didn't have the strength to protest. Nandi paused and glanced at Mike. "Their chance is small." His jaw tightened. "Then let them fight." She met his eyes for a long moment, seeing something in him she hadn't expected, but then nodded. "All right," she murmured. "We fight with them." Minutes turned into an hour. The station went quiet. Too quiet. Outside, the insects hummed. Inside, there was only the beeping of the old portable monitor and the ragged breaths of two cubs between worlds. Emma leaned close to Mike. "Are you okay?" "No, I'm not. But they might be." One cub, the larger, jerked suddenly. A tremor rippled through its body. Then another. Nandi moved fast, adjusting the IV, checking its heartbeat. The toxin is peaking. This is the worst part. The smaller cub started shaking too, silent, violent tremors. Emma covered her mouth. "Oh God." "Stay calm," Mike whispered, though his own voice faltered. The larger cub collapsed back onto the blanket, limbs twitching. Its breathing stuttered, then stopped. Just stopped. Emma gasped. Nandi cursed under her breath and grabbed a syringe. "Not today," she hissed. "Not these two." She injected a stimulant into the cub's leg. Nothing happened. For 3 seconds, the world held still. Then a faint, thin breath shuddered out of the cub's chest. Nandi exhaled, shoulders dropping half an inch. "Come on, little one. Come back to me." The smaller cub let out a soft gasp, almost a cry, and pressed its head against the blanket. Mike stared at it, heart crawling up his throat. "That one's worse," he said. He didn't know how he knew, but he did. Nandi checked it. Her silence said everything. Emma turned to Mike. "Talk to them," she whispered desperately. "They listen to your voice." He didn't argue. He knelt between the blankets, placing one hand near each cub, not touching, just close enough for them to feel the warmth of his skin. "Hey," he said quietly, "I'm still here." His voice trembled, but he didn't hide it. "You've already survived more than most things in this world. You held on when your mother couldn't. That strength didn't come from nowhere." The larger cub twitched just a flicker. "You're fighters," he whispered. "Both of you. I'm not asking you to trust me. I know I haven't earned that. But if you want to stay in this world, then fight. Just fight." Emma wiped at her eyes, silent. Cabello stood in the doorway, hat in hand, not daring to breathe. Nandi kept working, adjusting doses, checking vitals, murmuring encouragement in a language older than the station walls. Then for a long stretch, nothing changed. The cubs lay still. Too still. Night crept fully over the station, and the first stars appeared through the window as if watching the room's tiny war with fate. Finally, the smaller cub stirred. Its paws flexed weakly. Its ears twitched. Then the larger cub took a slow, dragging breath, a breath that rattled, but existed. Nandi leaned back, exhausted, not safe yet, but alive. Emma let out a sound between a sob and a laugh. Mike placed a trembling hand gently on the edge of their blankets, not touching them, just anchoring himself. "Good kids," he whispered. "Stay with us." He didn't know that Emma was watching him, studying the lines on his face deepened by guilt and hope. She wasn't filming. Not this moment. Some things didn't belong to cameras. Outside, a hyena whooped in the darkness. Inside, there were 2 lion cubs clinging to life with claws too small and hearts too stubborn. And Mike Lawson, once a man who took life for a living, now stood guard over the only 2 that mattered.
The night dragged on in slow, fragile inches. Mike didn't move from the spot between the makeshift incubators, his hands resting on the bins as if his touch alone could anchor the cubs to life. The hum of the old station lights mixed with the soft hiss of the oxygen line Nandi had rigged from parts that looked like they belonged in a farm shed instead of a clinic. Outside, darkness pressed against the windows. The world beyond seemed impossibly far, just wind, insects, and the low calls of nocturnal hunters sweeping across the plains. But inside that cramped room, time had narrowed to a single question. Could 2 poisoned cubs hold on long enough for sunrise? Emma sat curled in a chair near the corner, her head drooping lower every minute. She hadn't intended to sleep, but exhaustion had a way of making its own decisions. Cabello had stepped outside to patrol, giving Nandi and Mike
quiet space to fight their battle. Nandi checked the monitors again. "Their heart rates have stabilized a little," she said softly. "They're not out of danger, but they're not slipping anymore." Mike nodded, relief flickering across his tired face. "They're stubborn. Got that from their mother." He still couldn't shake the image of the lioness at the creek, the terrible stillness, the empty eyes. But equally impossible to forget was the memory before that, years ago, when she'd risen after his shot and run from him on 3 shaking legs. That look, that impossible look, as if she'd understood something about him he hadn't yet understood himself. Nandi glanced at him sideways. "You called her Nyala earlier. You knew her?" Mike hesitated. I crossed paths with her before." He wasn't sure how much he could say. Not yet, not with 2 lives hanging in the balance. Nandi didn't pry. Instead, she reached out and touched the back of Mike's hand. Light, brief, but grounding. "Whatever you did then, you're doing different now." He didn't trust himself to respond. Hours passed in quiet bursts. One of the cubs whimpered in its sleep, an eerie, thin sound. The other shifted its paw weakly towards the edge of its bin, as though searching for its sibling. Mike moved the containers closer together, letting their paws touch through the ventilation holes. The effect was immediate. Both cubs settled, breathing in shaky unison. "They need each other," Nandi said, watching. "More than they need us." "They need both," he murmured. Just before dawn, the smaller cub's breathing hitched again, fast and shallow. Nandi went rigid, grabbed her stethoscope, and leaned over it. "Come on, little one, not now." Mike closed his eyes. He reached into the bin, letting his hand rest gently near the cub's tiny chest. Not touching, just allowing his warmth to be felt. "Stay," he whispered, voice low and broken. "You made it this far. Don't stop now." For a moment, the cub didn't respond. Then, it pressed its nose weakly against his wrist. Not much, not strong, but a decision. Emma, half awake now, covered her mouth as tears welled. "It knows you," she whispered. "No," he said quietly. "It just knows I didn't leave." The smaller cub's breathing steadied. The larger one startled slightly, then let out a tiny chirp, a sound cubs use to check on their siblings. Normal, natural, a sliver of wildness resurfacing. Sunrise found them that way. 2 cubs fighting their way back into the world, and 3 adults too exhausted to move. When the first beam of light cut through the window pane, Nandi finally let herself exhale. They've made it through the worst of the night. If they decline again, it'll be later. Their bodies are responding. Emma rubbed her eyes. "So, they're going to live?" Nandi hesitated. "I won't say that yet, but they have a chance." Mike leaned back in his chair, his spine screaming, his eyes burning, his heart pounding with something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Cabello stepped inside moments later. All quiet. No vehicles. Whoever was out there last night isn't close. "That won't last," Mike said. "They'll come looking again. They wanted the cubs." Emma looked from the bins to Mike. "But why? They're tiny. They're sick. They're valuable," Cabello said bluntly. "Lion cubs sell for more money than a grown carcass. People want them for pets, for breeding, for trade." Emma's face fell. "Monsters." "No," Mike said. "Just people who forgot these are lives, not souvenirs." He stood, stretching stiff muscles, and looked down at the cubs. 2 small bodies wrapped in blankets, their paws still touching through the holes. He said, "We'll need a plan. Not just for today,
for all the days after. Nandi nodded. First, we'd keep them alive. Then you decide what comes next. Mike rested a hand on the bin. It wasn't a decision anymore. It was a responsibility he hadn't asked for but couldn't walk away from. I'm not losing them. He didn't add the rest. I already lost their mother. Outside, the sun was rising. Inside, 2 cubs slept, breathing, fragile, but alive. It was more than they had had the night before, and for Mike Lawson, it was enough to keep fighting.
The sun had climbed halfway over the horizon before anyone in the station dared to breathe normally again. Mike hadn't slept. Neither had Nandi. Emma looked like she'd aged 10 years in one night, her hair frizzed from worry and the heat, her voice raw from whispering prayers she wasn't sure she believed in. But the cubs, against every reasonable expectation, were alive. Weak, fragile, trembling with each breath, but alive. Nandi stood, stretching her back until it cracked. "They made it through the night," she said softly. "Now we watch for the next 24 hours. That's the danger window." Emma leaned over the bins. "What does a good sign look like?" "Movement," Nandi said. "Eating, trying to stand, curiosity, anything that shows their minds are waking back up." Mike didn't look away from the cubs. "And a bad sign?" Nandi hesitated. "Stillness." The smaller cub twitched its ears at the sound of her voice, a whisper of life, but the larger cub remained curled tightly, its paws flexing faintly in sleep. "They need names," Emma murmured, trying to smile. "If they're going to fight this hard, they deserve something more than the big one and the small one." Mike almost smiled. "Not yet. Naming something before you know if it'll survive, that's superstition even I don't fight against." Emma didn't argue. She simply pulled her chair closer, refusing to be more than a foot away from them. An hour passed, then another. The air warmed with the rising sun, and light filtered through the station windows, painting soft lines across the cubs' blankets. Nandi changed their IV bags, checked their hydration levels, and cleaned their tiny faces with a damp cloth. Emma filmed quietly, her voice a soft narration for whispering hearts, a tone not meant for spectacle, but for reverence. "These cubs," she whispered to the camera, "are teaching us how hard the wild fights to survive, even when humans fail it." Mike heard her, but his mind was elsewhere. With every slow rise of the smaller cub's chest, he felt something uncoil inside him. Hope, maybe, or fear of hoping too much. He watched the larger cub closely. Its breaths were deeper now, less erratic. That alone felt like a blessing carved from stone. Finally, the larger cub stirred. Its head lifted, barely, but enough. Emma gasped, "It's waking up!" Nandi rushed over. "Easy," she murmured. "Let it come back in its own time." The cub blinked against the bright room, pupils narrowing it to thin lines. Its focus darted from Emma to Nandi to the wall, confused, overwhelmed. Then it found Mike, sitting still as a statue, legs crossed, wounded glove resting gently against the edge of the bin. The cub's breaths changed, faster but steady. Recognition? Or just the memory of safety? Mike leaned forward, voice low and steady. "Hey, you remember I stayed. Now keep holding." The cub let out a tiny sound, not a cry, not a growl, something in between. And then, with effort that looked monumental for its small body, it stretched out one paw, touching his glove. Emma's eyes filled instantly. Mike, it knows you." "No," he said quietly. "It remembers I stayed." The smaller cub shifted then too, pressing its tiny flank against the larger one as if to say, "Don't go anywhere without me." Their matching breaths filled the room. Nandi wiped sweat from her brow. "They're stabilizing, slowly, but it's happening." Mike didn't move. "They need food." "They're not ready," Nandi warned, "but Maybe a few drops, a test. Emma prepared a bottle, goat's milk formula, warm and thin. Mike held his breath as she lifted it to the edge of the bin. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the smaller cub lifted its nose. Its nostrils twitched. It pushed its head, barely an inch, toward the bottle. Emma whispered, "Come on, sweetheart." The cub latched, weakly, sloppily, but it drank. Emma's hands shook so badly that Mike reached out to steady the bottle. They held it together, watching the cub take slow, desperate mouthfuls of life. When the larger cub raised its head too, Nandi almost choked on her breath. "They're trying," she murmured. "My God, they're trying!" For a moment, just a moment, the station felt like a place where miracles didn't need permission. Then Cabello burst into the doorway, panting and wide-eyed. "Mike," he said, breathless, "tracks, fresh ones, coming from the west." Emma's face drained of color. "The poachers?" Cabello nodded. "Not far. An hour, maybe less. They're searching." Mike rose slowly, his entire posture shifting. He wasn't just the man begging two dying cubs to live anymore. Something steeled inside him, a resolve forged in the ashes of his past. "They want the cubs," he said. "Then we're moving them." Nandi stiffened. "Mike, they're barely stable. Moving them now could... Staying here will kill them faster," he said. "We're out of time." Emma looked from Mike to the cubs, then to the windows, as if danger might appear at any second. "Where do we take them?" "The old quarantine shed," Cabello said immediately. "Stronger walls, only one entrance, easier to defend." Mike nodded. "Get the truck. Emma, pack the bottles. Nandi, prepare the IV lines for transport." "And the cubs?" Emma whispered. I lifted each bin gently, holding them as though they were made of spun glass. "They've survived the worst poison on this land, and I'd be damned if I let a couple of men with guns finish the job." Outside, the wind shifted. Dust rose. Footsteps somewhere in the distance. And inside the ranger station, two lion cubs clung to life while the man carrying them prepared to face the darkness he once belonged to.
The quarantine shed sat on the far edge of the station property, an old cement structure once used to isolate injured antelope during disease outbreaks. Now it stood in half ruins, patched together with mesh wire, wooden beams, and a rusted door reinforced with steel plates. Not pretty, but solid, defensible. Mike carried the two bins as gently as if they held fire, or his own heartbeat. Emma jogged beside him with the formula bottles and blankets, while Cabello walked in a wide arc, rifle up, scanning the brush with a hunter's focus. Nandi followed last, monitoring the IV lines that trailed delicately from the cub's paws. The world felt like it held its breath. Every rustle in the tall grass sounded like footsteps. Every shift of wind whispered danger. They reached the shed just as the sun reached its highest point. Inside, the air was cooler, still shaded enough to keep the cubs from overheating. Dust motes floated lazily through the light, and the scent of hay clung to the walls, fading but familiar. "Sit them here," Nandi instructed, pointing to two padded pallets she'd arranged moments earlier. Mike lowered each bin carefully, then opened the lids. The cubs didn't try to climb out. They barely twitched, but they blinked at the change of light. Awareness returned in flickers. "These next hours," Nandi murmured, "will tell us if their bodies are stabilizing or only rising before another crash." Emma knelt beside the smaller cub. "Do lions dream?" she asked, half to herself. Mike didn't smile. "Only the ones that think they'll live long enough to." He reached into the bin of the larger cub. When he brushed the side of its face, it leaned weakly into the touch. That small gesture, tiny, exhausted but intentional, hit him harder than he expected. Emma watched him. "You're bonded to them," she said softly. Not bonded, responsible. Sometimes those are the same thing. He didn't answer. Nandid checked the IVs again. Their hydration is improving. Heart rate is irregular, but not collapsing. We keep feeding them small amounts every hour, no more. Emma nodded. I'll take the first feeding. Mike shook his head. That's mine. I need them to know my voice. She didn't argue. She'd seen what his voice had done in the worst hour of the night. Minutes passed in quiet work, adjusting bedding, closing the reinforced door, positioning the cubs so they could see one another. When they settled again, just touching paws through the holes, Nandi finally stepped back. Now we wait. The waiting didn't last. A low, guttural cough echoed from outside, too deep to be human, too wet to be wind. Cabello froze. That's a warning call. Emma's eyes widened. From what? Hyena, Mike said immediately. A big male. Nandi tensed, drawn by the scent of sick animals. Or for something else, Cabello added darkly. Scavengers follow the same trails poachers do. The hyena called again, closer this time. Mike moved to the shed window, peering out through the wire mesh, his pulse hammered. The animal strutted out of the tall grass, shoulders hunched, head low. Its fur was patchy around the muzzle, stained dark. Its eyes were fixed on the shed, on the cubs. Emma whispered, Do hyenas take cubs? Mike said, unprotected, or if they smell sickness. The hyena prowled closer, nose twitching, its tail flicked. Then it froze, head lifting toward the west, toward the direction Cabello had warned about earlier. Footsteps, not animal, men. Mike's hand instinctively went to the pistol at his hip. Nandi whispered, Are they coming here? Yes, Mike said quietly, and I don't think they're lost. The hyena let out a nervous yip and backed away, vanishing into the brush as if it sensed something worse approaching. Mike turned from the window, his face carved with determination. We keep the cubs alive and we keep them hidden. Emma's voice cracked. Mike, what are we going to do? He checked the lock on the door, then the hinges, then the rifle Cabello handed him. His old hunter's instincts, ones he wished had died long ago, were waking up, sharp and cold. But this time, they pointed in a different direction. We do what their mother would have done. We protect them, no matter what's outside. As the footsteps drew nearer, slow, deliberate, searching, Mike slid himself between the cubs and the door, his shadow stretching across their bins. The cubs stirred weakly. The smaller one made a sound, small, frightened, familiar. It was the same sound it had made under the lodge floor when it believed it was alone in the world. Not this time, Mike whispered, more vow than comfort. Outside, branches cracked. Then a voice, rough, male, called out in a language that made Cabello curse under his breath. They weren't passing by. They were hunting. Again. And this time, Mike Lawson was ready to meet them, not as the man he used to be, but as the man these cubs needed him to become.
The footsteps slowed outside the shed, turning from casual noise into intentional movement. Mike knew that sound. Boots brushing against dry grass. Careful. Testing. It was the same rhythm he had made years ago when he'd stalked living things that trusted nothing. Now he felt the shame of that memory settle in his bones like winter cold. Emma leaned close. Are they poachers? Mike didn't answer. He didn't need to. Her face paled anyway. Cabello stepped beside the door, rifle held low but ready. They're sweeping in a half-moon pattern, he whispered, trying to flush something out. Nandi exhaled slowly. Then they know something's here. Mike felt something inside him lock into place, an old instinct he thought he'd buried. But this time, it wasn't hunger, or thrill, or profit. It was purpose. He moved to the cubs. Both lay still but not unconscious. The small female blinked up at him, her eyes glazed with fever, but aware enough to sense the tension. When he placed his palm on her side, she pressed weakly against it. That was enough. He stood and faced Cabello. Whatever happens, they're not getting these cubs. Cabello nodded once. Then we don't open that door unless it's for us walking out. Emma swallowed. Mike, they'll have guns. Then we don't let them fire them, he said. This shed echoes. Anything loud will draw every ranger at the station. Nandi frowned. But if the men know that, they'll avoid a gunfight. They'll try something else. Mike knew exactly what something else meant. The first voice came almost playfully. Station workers, we saw the smoke. Thought maybe someone needed help. Cabello shot Mike a look. They don't think we're stupid. They think we're desperate. Mike stepped toward the window, but stayed tucked in shadow. Outside, he could make out 3 men. One holding a machete, one carrying a long hunting bow, and the third with something slung over his shoulder. Not a firearm. A snare coil. He felt heat rise up his spine. These weren't casual hunters. They were professionals. And they knew exactly what lion cub pelts sold for. The man with the machete cupped his hands around his mouth. Anyone inside? We saw tracks. Small animals, maybe hurt. We can help you catch them. Emma pressed her hand to her mouth. God, they're pretending to be rescuers. It's an old trick, Mike said quietly, jaw tightening. Works on tourists, works on new rangers, not on us. The cubs stirred again, as if they understood danger was circling like a storm. Mike felt their fear in his chest like a fist. He turned to Emma, dimmed the lantern. She obeyed immediately, lowering the light until the shed fell into a cool, shadowy calm. Only a thin beam from the window lit the air. Outside, the men whispered among themselves. Then boots moved, closer. Much closer. The machete blade scraped lightly against the shed's outer wall, tracing a slow, taunting line. Looks old, could be hiding something inside. Maybe locked, he murmured. Cabello leaned toward Mike. If they start trying to break in, we stop them before they reach the door, Mike said. Emma looked panicked. How? Without shooting. We can't start a war here. Mike inhaled, held it, released it. There's another way. Fear. Cabello blinked. Fear? Mike nodded. These men know the bush. They know what a wounded lion sounds like. They know what a lion defending its den sounds like. They don't know what's in this shed. So we use that. He moved to the window, braced one hand against the wall, and summoned a sound from a memory he wished he didn't have. A deep, vibrating snarl that rolled out of his chest like gravel dragged across metal. The kind of sound he had once tried to mimic to lure predators close for clients. Except this time, he wasn't luring anyone. He was warning them. The sound echoed through the shed walls, low and guttural. Outside, the men stopped instantly. A beat of silence. Then the man with the snare hissed. Lion. Injured, close. The bowman swore under his breath. Too risky. If she has cubs, she does, the machete man whispered. Tracks lead here. Mike made the snarl again, deeper this time, then dragged a metal bucket across the floor, letting the scraping mimic the restless pacing of a large, agitated animal. Cabello's eyebrows lifted. You hunted too long, my friend. That was perfect. But Emma was staring at Mike with something like awe. That didn't sound human. Mike didn't respond. Outside, the men murmured urgently. Steps shifted backwards. Leaves brushed as bodies retreated into the tall grass. Then, silence. complete, until the faint snap of a twig signaled they were moving away, fast. Only when the sound faded entirely did Mike finally release the breath in his chest. Emma sagged with relief. "Are they gone?" "For now," Cabello said, "but they'll circle back. Men like that don't leave empty-handed." Nandi checked the cubs again, her hand steady despite the tension. "Which means that we don't have long. Their vitals are unstable. If they crash again, we won't hear the men coming back over the noise." Mike wiped sweat from the back of his neck. "Then we stabilize them before nightfall. We make them strong enough to move, because after dark," he looked toward the window, toward the brush where danger crouched unseen. "After dark, this place won't hold." The small cub whimpered softly. Mike moved to her, kneeling beside her pallet. When he stroked her head, she blinked at him, slow, trusting. He whispered, "I'm not losing you. Not again. Not to anyone." Outside, the sun dipped lower, bleeding orange into the bushveld. Shadows stretched long and thin, gathering strength. Inside the shed, Mike felt the weight of a choice settle over him. To save the cubs, he would have to become the version of himself he feared most, the man who understood predators, human and animal, alike. But this time, he would use that knowledge to protect life, not take it.
Dark came down fast. By the time the last orange strip of sky faded behind the mopane trees, the shed was wrapped in a kind of heavy, listening silence, the kind that makes every sound feel louder than it ought to be. Somewhere out there, men and hyenas walked the same ground, following the same scent trails. Inside, the only smell that mattered was medicine, milk, and the faint, bitter ghost of poison. The cubs slept for a while, if you could call it sleep. Their bodies twitched from time to time, paws flexing as if chasing something only they could see. Every time one of them jerked, Emma jumped. Every time their breathing hitched, Nandi checked the monitor. Cabello slipped out twice, circling the station in a slow, wide loop, tracking the last place he'd heard the men's voices. When he came back the second time, his shoulders were looser. "Tire marks on the sand road," he said, quietly. "Fresh. Heading toward the main highway. I think they decided there was easier money somewhere else." Mike didn't relax, not really, but the knot in his chest loosened a notch. "For now," he said. "They'll be back out here one day. Men like that always are." "Then we make sure these two are long gone and hard to find by then," Cabello replied. The station settled into a strange, watchful calm. Nandi dozed upright in a plastic chair, arms folded, her head tipped back. Emma sat cross-legged on the floor between the pallets, her back resting against the wall, camera forgotten in her lap. Around midnight, the larger cub stirred. Its eyes opened, clearer than before, though still fogged with fatigue. It lifted its head, swayed, then planted both paws, trying to pull itself up. The effort looked enormous, but it tried anyway. Stubborn little thing. Mike moved closer, kneeling beside the bin. "Easy. You're not ready to climb Everest yet?" The cub wobbled, then collapsed back onto the blanket with a soft grunt of frustration. Its nose found his wrist again, pushing into the worn leather of his glove. The smaller cub woke next, blinking hard against the dim light. It didn't try to stand. It simply scooted forward until its flank touched its siblings and sighed like someone finally found their half of the world. Nandi rubbed her eyes and leaned down to check their gums. Color's better. Still pale, but not as bad. If they were going to crash again, it likely would have been already. Emma grinned through her exhaustion. "So, can we name them now?" Mike hesitated, but the argument he had been carrying around for years, that you don't name what you might lose, felt smaller in this cramped, hopeful room. He looked at the smaller cub first, the one who had come back from the edge with that stubborn push of his nose into his skin. "Luna," he said quietly. "For the night that didn't manage to take her." Emma smiled. "Luna," she repeated softly, trying the name out in the air. "And him?" The larger cub blinked at him, eyes a little too big for his face, spirit already pushing ahead of his body's limits. "Rio," Mike decided. "He moves like water when he's half dead." Nandi huffed a tired laugh. "Luna and Rio. Fine.
But don't you dare let them think they're house pets. They won't, he said. They're not staying small forever. That truth hung there, just for a second. They will grow, and one day I will have to let them go. It was a distant ache, but real. The next day bled into the one after that, and then into a week. The poachers didn't return. Rangers from a neighboring post followed the tracks to the edge of the reserve and found where the truck had turned toward the highway. For now, the human threat had moved on. The poison, however, hadn't. Luna and Rio spent the first days riding a razor's edge. Some mornings Nandi found them limp and glassy-eyed. Some evenings they rallied with a little more strength than before. Little by little, drops of formula turned into full feeds. Little by little, sleeping between every breath turned into fighting the bottle, batting at it with clumsy paws. The first time Rio managed to stand on all fours for more than a few seconds, he used his new strength to headbutt Mike square in the chest, then promptly fell over again. Emma laughed so hard she had to sit down. Luna was quieter, but there was a sharpness in her gaze. She watched everything, where the door opened, where the light came in, who entered, who left. When Mike sat beside her bin, she'd inch close enough for her whiskers to brush his wrist, then close her eyes as if finally allowing herself to rest. When their IV lines came out at last, it felt like pulling anchoring ropes from a dock. They were no longer tethered to machines, just to the hands that had kept them here. On the 12th day, they moved from the shed to a small outdoor pen near the back of the station. 10 steps of grass, a few shaded spots, a short section of log to climb on. It wasn't the wild, but it was sky, it was wind, it was the smell of earth instead of antiseptic. Luna stepped out first, blinking against the sunlight, her ears twitching at every sound. Rio barreled after her, tripping over his own paws, rolling, then popping back up as if embarrassed. Mike leaned on the fence, hands wrapped in the wire. He watched them sniff the grass, tap the log, turn the world into a place they had some say in again. "You know," Emma said quietly, standing beside him, "if this ever airs on Whispering Hearts, people are going to fall in love with them. They'll fall in love with the idea of them. The real work, the days like we just had, that's less glamorous. Maybe. But they'll feel this part too, the part where you didn't walk away." He watched Rio chase a grasshopper twice his size, and Luna sit there, head tilted, watching him with the exact expression of a tired older sister. For the first time since he'd seen Yala lying still by the creek, the thought came, not as hope, not yet, but as possibility. Maybe I can get this right. Just once. He didn't know then that getting it right would mean breaking his own heart on purpose. All he knew was that 2 lion cubs were alive, out in the sun because he had offered his hand into the dark and refused to pull it back.
The heat rolled off the earth in slow, shimmering waves as Mike guided the old station truck along the dirt road that led toward the training valley. The cubs, no, not cubs anymore, not really, shifted in their crates in the back seat. Luna watched through the slats, silent as ever. Rio complained the whole drive, making small grumbling sounds like he was arguing with the universe. Emma rode shotgun, adjusting her camera strap. You'd think after surviving poison and 2 near-death infections, they'd be grateful for a car ride. Mike smiled, though the truth was sitting heavier on his chest. They're strong enough for what comes next. That's all that matters. Cabello's voice echoed in his mind from 2 nights earlier. If you want them to become lions, truly lions, you need a place where you're not the center of their world. That place was the training valley. 20 rugged acres of grass, broken ridges, and wild silence. The first step toward letting Luna and Rio become something he couldn't protect forever. When they arrived, the valleys spread before them, sunlit, raw, and alive. Birds scattered, insects hummed. The world here didn't care about human fears or human guilt. It turned on its own rules. Mike climbed out and let the wind hit his face. He inhaled deeply, tasting dust and acacia on the air. "This is where it starts," he murmured. Emma joined him. "Where what starts?" He glanced back at the crates. "Their real lives."
Together they unloaded Luna first. The young lioness stepped out cautiously, leaving soft prints in the red dirt. She lifted her head, tasting the air with a seriousness that made Mike's throat tighten. Rio tumbled out next, literally, landing in a heap, then shaking himself off like nothing had happened. Mike snorted. Figures. Rio didn't waste a second. He darted forward, exploring everything he could reach. Luna stayed closer, her gaze constantly shifting, calculating, judging distance, reading the land like she remembered it from another life. Emma raised her camera. "Mind if I go ahead?" Mike said softly. "Just don't get too close." Rio made the first attempt at a stalk that afternoon. A guinea fowl wandered into the open, clueless and plump. Rio crouched, too high, too eager, tail swishing like a flag signaling the hunt. Emma muffled a laugh. "That bird has better odds than he does." Luna watched Rio's attempt, and in that stillness was the unmistakable outline of a leader in the making. Rio launched himself. The guinea fowl flapped its wings once, shrieked, and took off. Rio face-planted in the dirt. He stood, shook himself, and roared, a tiny, indignant sound that Emma laughed again. But Luna had learned from Rio's mistake. She circled quietly toward the tall grass, head low, body melting into the land. Mike felt something twist inside him. "Look at her," he whispered. "She's remembering something, instincts her mother must have taught her without ever being there." Luna reached the grass, waited, then moved with a grace that didn't belong to something so young. When she pounced, not on the bird, but on a grasshopper, it was a perfect, controlled leap. She held it triumphantly between her paws and glanced toward Mike with an expression he could only interpret as, "See?" Rio bounded toward her, jealous immediately, tripping over his feet. Luna lifted the grasshopper higher, victory claimed. "They're getting it," Emma said, piece by piece. But the day wasn't done testing them. As the sun began to dip, the valley shifted. Shadows grew sharp. Sounds changed. A low grunt rumbled from somewhere near the ridge, and Luna froze. Rio followed suit, his hackles lifting. Emma whispered, "What was that?" I knew without needing to hear it again. Warthog. Big one by the sound. A rustle, a snort, and then the boar appeared, scars down its flank, tusks curved like hooked knives. It wasn't hunting. It wasn't afraid. It was simply walking through its home. But Rio, still high on his earlier hunt, made a reckless move. He charged. Emma gasped, "No, Rio!" Mike's heart lurched. Warthogs killed lions sometimes, especially young ones. "It's okay," I said sharply, though I didn't believe it. Rio skidded to a stop just out of range, but the boar turned, ready to defend itself. Luna stepped between Rio and the danger, not a sound, not a hiss. She simply stood there, small, thin, but steady. The warthog stared at her for a tense few seconds, then snorted and trotted off into the scrub. Emma exhaled. She protected him. Mike swallowed hard. That's what lionesses do. They lead. They hold the line. Rio, completely unaware of how close he had come to disaster, batted Luna with his paw, proud of himself. Luna swatted him back, but her eyes softened. Mike felt something deeper settle in his chest. Pride, fear, hope, all tangled into one knot. They're becoming who they're supposed to be. And the more they do, the less they'll need me. Emma touched his shoulder. That's the point, isn't it? He didn't answer, because letting them grow was one thing. Letting them go was another story entirely.
By the time Luna and Rio reached 9 months old, the training valley no longer felt like a classroom. It felt like a place they owned. Their paw prints tracked across every ridge, every thicket, every mud patch along the stream bed. Mike could read the story of their days just by walking the boundary. The places Rio had charged through like a runaway truck. The perfect crescent-shaped imprints where Luna had crouched in absolute silence, waiting for something only she could sense. They were growing fast. Too fast. That morning, Emma rode with Mike again, bouncing over the rough road as the first cool light settled over the day. Neither of them spoke at first. The quiet wasn't awkward, it was heavy, expectant, as if both of them knew something was coming that neither wanted to name. "You've been stretching out your visits," Emma finally said. "A day between, then 2. Yesterday, 3. Mike gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. "I have to. If they're going to be wild, I can't be the center of their map." She turned to him. "But does it feel right?" He didn't answer, not with words. His silence said enough. When they reached the valley, Luna and Rio emerged from behind the brush, taller, leaner, muscles rolling in ways that hadn't been there weeks ago. Luna moved with the confidence of something who understood her place in the world. Rio moved like the world was his playground and he was just waiting for it to catch up. Rio bounded toward the truck first, rubbing his head against the bumper with a low, rumbling greeting. Luna followed more slowly, her eyes on Mike instead of the vehicle. "She missed you." Mike stepped out, and Rio nearly knocked him over with enthusiasm. Luna brushed against his leg once, soft, almost hesitant, before walking past him. That one gentle pass of her body hit him harder than a full tackle would have. "Hey girl, I'm here." The morning training began like usual. Tracking exercises, slow stalks, reading the wind. Luna excelled, her movements fluid and precise. Rio tried, then got distracted by a beetle, then pounced on a shadow, then tripped over a root. Emma laughed. "He's like a toddler with claws." "He'll grow into himself. Some lions don't get their coordination until they're older, but his instincts, those are sharp." And they were. Rio might have been reckless, but he felt danger like a spark. Luna felt it like a deep vibration. Together, they were becoming a pair that could survive anything. Almost anything. Around midday, the first test arrived. A lone hyena, lean and hungry, nosing around the far ridge. It wasn't unusual. Predators cross paths in the wild every day, but for inexperienced lions, it could turn deadly fast. Luna saw it first. She froze, body low, tail flicking once. Mike felt the shift before he even spotted the animal. Rio followed her gaze. His ears went flat. Emma whispered, "Do we intervene?" "Only if we must. This is one of the moments that decides who they'll become." The hyena ambled closer, sniffing the breeze. Too close. Rio stepped forward, sounding a growl that was more enthusiasm than threat. But Luna held still, watching, calculating. Then, in a single measured move, she stepped in front of Rio, not blocking him, not holding him back, but placing herself where the hyena would see her first. The hyena froze. Luna lifted her head, not high, just enough. A warning, ancient and unmistakable. Mike felt goosebumps ripple over his arms. That stance. He had seen it before. On her mother. Years ago, before everything had gone wrong. Rio added another growl, this one deeper, more controlled. Then something extraordinary happened. Luna chuffed, a sound lions used only for family, for reassurance. She pressed her flank briefly against Rio's before stepping forward again, displaying not aggression, but calm dominance. The hyena studied them, then backed away. Emma exhaled shakily. My God, she led him. Mike nodded. She's ready. More ready than I ever thought she'd be. For a moment, he didn't notice that his hands were trembling. That afternoon, when Luna brought down her first real prey, a young impala weakened by the dry season, Mike watched from the ridge, heart in his throat. Her attack wasn't perfect, but it was decisive. Rio helped finish the job. They fed together, side by side, their faces smeared with the wild. Emma whispered, "Mike, they're lions now." He swallowed hard. "They are." He didn't say what came next. He didn't want to. They walked back toward the truck at dusk, the valley cooling into a blue-gray hush. Luna and Rio followed them only halfway. Then Luna stopped. Rio stopped beside her. Emma noticed first. "Mike, look." He turned. Both young lions sat there, silhouettes against the fading light, watching him. Not approaching, not asking, just watching. As if sensing a shift he hadn't told them about. As if preparing to choose the path without him. His throat tightened. "This is it," he murmured. "Is it time?" "Not today, but soon." Luna blinked slowly, a gesture that once meant he trusted enough to let him near. Now it meant he trusted enough to let him go. Rio yawned and bumped her shoulder as if to say, "We're okay, we're ready." Mike raised a hand. Luna didn't come forward. Neither did Rio. They simply watched him leave. As he climbed into the truck, his chest felt too full and too hollow at the same time. Emma closed her door quietly. "They're not losing you. They're becoming because of you." But Mike couldn't shake the truth rising inside him, quiet as a shadow stretching across the valley floor. They didn't need him anymore. And to do right by them, he would have to learn how to walk away.
The morning Mike chose to let Luna and Rio go started like every other morning in the reserve. The sun pushed slowly over the horizon, turning the valley gold. Birds called out their territorial songs. The world went on, indifferent to the decisions of a single man standing beside a weathered truck. But to Mike, nothing felt ordinary. Emma sensed it the moment he stepped out of the driver's seat. "Today?" she whispered. He nodded once. "Today." She didn't argue. She only placed a steady hand on his arm. "If you need time alone..." "No," he said gently. "They deserve for all of us to witness this." The training valley stretched before them, endless and quiet. Luna and Rio were already awake. Luna stood on the ridge, silhouetted sharp against the rising sun. Rio paced behind her, growing into his paws at last, muscles defined, mane beginning to darken around his neck. They looked nothing like the poison babies he'd pulled from under that lodge. They looked like lions meant for the wild. Mike felt the familiar tug in his chest, the fragile thread that had held them together from that first moment sheathed in shadow. He walked toward them slowly, his boots crunching over the dry grass. Luna's ears twitched at the sound. She turned, watching him with a calm that felt almost ceremonial. Rio bounded down first, as he'd always done, full of restless energy. But something was different. He didn't push against Mike. He didn't nuzzle his hand. He simply circled once, as if acknowledging a past rather than clinging to it. Luna descended more slowly. Each step seemed deliberate, thoughtful. She stopped a few feet from him, head tilted slightly, eyes reflecting things he could feel, but not name. Emma stood back, recording, but silent. Mike inhaled deeply. "You two made it farther than anyone expected, farther than I deserved." Rio huffed, tail swishing. Mike smiled sadly. "Yeah, I know. You don't understand the words, but maybe you understand this." He crouched to the ground,
lowering himself the same way he had the day he first earned their fragile trust. Back then, he'd done it to show he wasn't a threat. Today, he did it to show respect. Luna stepped closer. Rio followed. He offered his hand, open, steady, the same gesture that had started everything. Luna reached him first. She didn't sniff his glove the way she used to. She didn't rub her face against his palm like a cub desperate for reassurance. Instead, she pressed her forehead gently to his, a gesture older than language, a lioness's blessing. Rio placed a paw, larger now, strong, on Mike's knee. Not possessive, not needy, acknowledgement. Emma wiped her eyes. "They remember," she whispered. "After everything, you're not forgotten." Mike didn't speak, couldn't. His throat felt too tight, but in the silence, he felt something release inside him. Not pain, not loss, completion. When Luna finally stepped back, she didn't look confused or sad. She looked ready. Rio bumped her shoulder as if asking her to lead. And she did, turning toward the far ridge, toward the life waiting for them beyond human fences. They walked away. Halfway to the ridge, Rio paused and looked over his shoulder. Luna did too. A single heartbeat, long enough to etch itself into the rest of Mike's days. Then, without fear, without hesitation, they continued. Emma lowered her camera. "That's it? That's the last moment?" Mike watched the space where they had disappeared into the tall grass. The valley swallowed them without ceremony, as the wild always does. "No," he said quietly. "Not the last, just the last one that belongs to me." Months passed. Seasons shifted. The valley grew thick with summer storms, then thinning winds. Mike returned to patrol work, mentoring young rangers, answering radio calls, tracking migration patterns. Simple, necessary work that filled the days, but not the quiet places inside him. Every once in a while, stories drifted across the reserve. A young female lion with an unusually calm confidence. A bold male challenging older males at waterholes. Tracks, paired, close together, cut into the riverbed mud. Mike never chased these stories. He only listened. Then one evening, near dusk, under a sky washed lavender and gold, his radio crackled with a guide's excited voice. "Two lions on the ridge road, a male and a female traveling together. The female has a crescent of dark spots behind her right ear." Mike froze. The world narrowed to a single line of static, then cleared. "And the male has a thickening mane and a limp on the back left leg. Looks old, like something from when he was younger." Rio's old injury. The one from the poison swelling. Mike didn't plan the next part. His hands simply moved. Ignition, headlights off. Quiet approach down the service road. He stopped 60 yards from where the ridge curved and the grass opened into a long clearing. He stepped out slowly, heart pounding in a way he hadn't felt since the night he first reached into darkness and met tiny claws full of fear. The lions stepped into view. Magnificent, wild, whole. Luna saw him first. A stillness spread across her body, not surprise, not fear, recognition. Rio appeared beside her, mane catching the last streak of sunlight. He didn't charge. He didn't roar. He simply watched. Mike sat down in the grass, lowering himself once again, this time not to ask for trust, but to offer thanks. Luna moved first, closing the distance in slow, deliberate steps. Rio followed, cautious, but not wary. And when they reached him, Luna brushed her head against his shoulder. Older now,
heavier, steady as the land beneath them. Rio placed his forehead to Mike's arm, a grown lion giving a gesture he hadn't made since he was small enough to fit under a lodge floor. Emma wasn't there this time. No camera, no witnesses. Just a man and two lions who had once needed him, and who now returned only because they remembered the shape of the hand that saved them. Mike didn't speak. He didn't need to. Luna stepped back. Rio followed. They turned toward the twilight. This time, when they walked away, Mike didn't feel loss. He felt peace. A full, deep peace that settled into every scar on his heart. Because some endings weren't endings at all. They were acknowledgments. Proof that what he had done mattered. That offering his hand into the darkness had changed more than two small lives. It had changed his own.